The notification lit up my phone at 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve, just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. It was from my father, Gregory. Just 3 lines, but they hit me hard. Emma, we've decided to keep dinner intimate this year. Just me, Caleb, and a few close friends. We'll catch up with you after the holidays. My fingers froze on the cup. Intimate. His code word for his new girlfriend being there, the one who was younger than me, and Caleb, the golden child, would be there too. I wouldn't. I didn't cry, didn't throw the phone. I didn't even ask why. The clarity hit me instantly. Cold and hard for 29 years, I had been the one to show up. But today I was the one they didn't need. It was like a switch flipped. This was the moment everything changed. I stared at the phone for a moment longer, the words on the screen almost mocking me. My father didn't need me for Christmas dinner. He didn't need me for anything. I had spent my entire life being the one who showed up. Fixing things, smoothing over tension, being the responsible one. But today, they didn't want me. I had become nothing but an inconvenience, a reminder of something they wanted to forget. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't the one who needed fixing. They were, and I wasn't going to keep playing their game. I set my phone down and walked over to my laptop. It felt heavy in my hands, as if it already knew what I was about to do. My mind was clear, calm. I didn't hesitate. I logged into my bank account, bypassing my savings, bypassing everything I'd worked so hard to build. I didn't need any of that anymore. I wasn't going to waste my life trying to hold on to things that didn't matter. No, this was about something else. I clicked into the wire transfer page and typed in the amount, $650,000. Every cent of my liquid cash, all the years of saving and sacrificing. My eyes didn't waver as I typed the recipient's details. The county bank holding the foreclosure title on Blackwood Ridge, a place my brother Caleb had once dreamed of owning. The ranch he had talked about, endlessly convinced that it was his destiny to have it. The place he'd bragged about for weeks, only for the financing to fall through his money always running out before his dreams. It was the perfect representation of everything wrong with him. His promises, his entitlement, his inability to actually do the work. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt as I hit send. The screen flashed the transfer complete. A few seconds later, I closed my laptop and stood up, moving through the house with purpose. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. I needed distance. Distance from them, from my past, from the weight of their expectations. My truck was cold, parked in the driveway with a thin layer of snow on the windshield. I didn't hesitate. I got in and drove. Past the house I grew up in, past the memories that clung to the walls like dust, and onto the road that would take me to Blackwood Ridge. The house was still a few hours away, but already I could feel a weight lifting from my shoulders, a sense of freedom creeping in. I drove through the snow, the wind biting against my skin, and felt like I was leaving something behind, something heavy, suffocating, but also something I had to leave behind to truly be myself. The ranch wasn't just an escape, though. It wasn't some impulsive purchase made in the heat of the moment. It was a statement. A place that was mine and only mine. A place that no one could take from me no matter what they tried. I wasn't buying it out of spite. I was buying it because it was the one thing my family couldn't control, and I was done being controlled. As the truck rumbled down the road, my mind wandered to the house, ahead sitting on 600 acres of Wyoming wilderness. It was big. It was isolated. It was cold. But it was mine. And for the first time in my life, that meant something. When I finally pulled up to Blackwood Ridge, the snow had piled high along the unplowed driveway, burying the path I had hoped to take. The truck lurched through the deep drifts, its tires fighting for traction as the engine roared. And there it was, the house, looming in front of me, dark and quiet like a giant that had been asleep for too long. I stopped the engine still running and stared at the place. My new home, or at least that's what I had told myself. The house looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were dark, the porch sagging, and the roof half covered in snow looked like it hadn't seen a repair in decades. It wasn't beautiful in any traditional sense. It didn't have any of the charm of a cozy home or the warmth of a place meant to be lived in. No, this house was imposing, cold, like it had been built to withstand everything, every storm, every challenge, every setback. And that's exactly what I needed. The house was a fortress, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe within its walls. It was like everything I had been through, everything my father had put me through, had been leading me here to this moment. I stepped out of the truck and felt the biting wind cut through my coat like a knife. The cold was sharp and unforgiving, but it didn't bother me. In fact, it felt oddly comforting. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the front door, each step carrying me farther away from the person I used to be. The person my father had wanted me to be. The person who was always trying to fix things to make everything right for everyone else. I didn't need to do that anymore. Not here, not now. The house wasn't warm, it wasn't inviting, but that was okay. I didn't need warmth. I needed space. I needed freedom. I needed to breathe without someone else's expectations closing in on me. And this place, this was mine. I could feel it in my bones. The moment I stepped over the threshold, I knew it. The silence inside was absolute. It wasn't a quiet I had ever known before. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, the kind that gnaws at you when you're left in a room with your own thoughts. This was the silence of control, of ownership. I wasn't just a guest here. I wasn't a visitor. This was my place, my sanctuary. I let the door swing shut behind me, and the sound of it locking into place was more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. It wasn't just the metal on metal. It was a boundary being set, a line that couldn't be crossed. No more could my father just waltz in and take what was mine. No more could Caleb waltz in treating my home like a place he was entitled to. This house wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a piece of property. It was the first step toward reclaiming my life. I walked through the house slowly, the echoes of my boots ringing out against the empty walls. The living room was vast but cold, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. The dust in the air seemed to swirl around me as if it too were trying to figure out what this place was going to become. There was a piece of plywood leaning against the stone hearth, the words, "Caleb's Lodge coming soon," painted sloppily in red letters. My brother had left it there 3 months ago when he was sure he'd be able to buy the place. He'd had the loan approved, or so he thought, and he'd already started claiming it as his own. I could almost hear his voice bragging about the parties he would throw, the business ventures he'd start. It wasn't real. None of it had been. I snapped the plywood with a sharp crack, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. I didn't hesitate. I picked it up, tossed it into the fire, and watched it burn. It was cathartic. Watching his delusion turn to ash, I could feel the warmth of the flames against my skin, but the house itself remained cold. And that was just fine, because it was my cold, my space, my decision. For the first time in my life, I was standing in a place where nothing else mattered. The past was gone, and all that was left was the present, the future, and the fact that I had something no one could take from me. I wasn't just running from my family. I wasn't running from my father or Caleb or their expectations. I was running to something. Something that belonged only to me. And Blackwood Ridge, for all its coldness, for all its neglect, was the perfect place for me to start over. That night the wind howled outside, but inside there was only silence. The kind of silence that settled around you like a heavy blanket, thick and absolute. I sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the dark corners of the living room. The house was still cold, but there was a sense of ownership in the stillness, a feeling that I had finally taken control. The next morning, I woke early before the sun had even begun to break over the horizon. The air was sharp, and the ground outside was covered in a fresh layer of snow. I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me, but it wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility. This was mine now, and I needed to make sure it stayed that way. I went to the truck and pulled out a toolbox I had packed just for this. No contractors, no hired help. This was something I had to do myself. I started with the cameras. I didn't want any surprises. I didn't want anyone showing up at my door unannounced, believing they had the right to just walk in. The cameras weren't fancy, but they were more than enough. I drilled holes into the eaves of the house, positioning them so they could cover the driveway, the porch, and the gate. I made sure every angle was covered. No one was getting past these eyes in the sky. I worked quickly, my hands steady as I ran the wires and screwed in the brackets, securing them in place. I could almost feel the sense of control growing with each turn of the screw, each camera I installed. It wasn't just about security. It was about making sure no one could ever take this from me. No one could ever invade this space, not without me knowing. Once the cameras were up and running, I turned my attention to the door. The front door had always been a weak point. The lock was old, the tumblers worn down from years of use. I wasn't going to take any chances. I didn't trust the flimsy hardware that had been there before. I wanted something stronger, something permanent. I pulled out the new locks. I had bought heavy-duty commercial-grade deadbolts that would take a crowbar to break through. I spent the next few hours working on the door, removing the old lock and replacing it with the new one. The metal clanged as I hammered in the screws, feeling the resistance of the wood as I tightened them down. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was satisfying, more so than I had anticipated. It was more than just a lock. It was a boundary, a statement, a line that couldn't be crossed. When I finally stepped back to look at my work, the door felt different. It wasn't just an entrance to a house anymore. It was a wall, a barrier that marked the threshold between my past and my future. The past was full of people who had crossed lines, ignored boundaries, taken more than they were ever entitled to, but not anymore. This was my space now, and I was setting the rules. The final thing I did that day was a simple but crucial act. I replaced the old locks on the gate. I made sure it was locked tight and that no one could come in unless I allowed it. The sound of the latch catching as I closed it was like the final click in a puzzle falling into place. This place was mine, and I had done everything I could to make sure no one would ever take it from me. As I stood there looking out over the vast expanse of snow-covered land, I felt a quiet pride. The house was still cold, still imposing, but it was no longer just an abandoned structure. It was a fortress, my fortress, and no one would ever take it from me. The sun was starting to dip behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the snow-covered land. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of me, but I didn't touch it. The house was still, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of the past was always there, lingering just beneath the surface, but now it felt more like a shadow I could confront. I opened my laptop again this time, pulling up the spreadsheet I had named Family Expenses. It wasn't something I had ever shared with anyone. It wasn't something I had ever wanted to face, really. But now with the ranch secured and my future ahead of me, I felt the need to finally look at the truth. As the cells on the screen blurred together, I went line by line, reviewing the money I had given away over the years. It started small, innocuous even, a $50,000 loan to my father when his business was failing. He had begged me for it, telling me that it was a temporary fix, that he would pay it back. But the loan never became a loan. The moment I signed that check, it became a gift. And then there was Caleb. There was always Caleb. The $12,000 I paid for his medical bills, which I later found out was really a settlement for a bar fight he started. I'd known something didn't add up, but I never asked the questions. I never needed to. It was just easier to help. But the biggest one, the one that had always stuck with me, was the $200,000. It was 3 years ago when Caleb got himself into serious trouble debt with the wrong people. Men who didn't send bills but showed up with baseball bats. Dad had called me in a panic, his voice cracking as he begged me to save him. "They're going to kill him," he cried. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated my portfolio, paid off Caleb's debt, and made it all disappear. I thought it was over. I thought I was doing the right thing. But what did I get in return? Caleb bought a new truck a month later, and he told everyone he had negotiated his way out of trouble. And me, I became invisible again, a ghost in my own family. The realization hit me like a cold wave every single time I had given. Emotionally, financially, without question, without hesitation. But they never saw me, not for who I was, not for what I was doing. They only saw me as the fixer, the one who made the problems disappear. I had been blind to it, but now looking at the spreadsheet, I couldn't deny it any longer. My family had been using me, manipulating me, draining me, and every time I thought I was helping, I was just enabling them to continue living the same destructive lives, expecting me to clean up after them. Buying the ranch wasn't just about getting away. It wasn't just about escaping the lies or the constant pull of their needs. No, it was about protection. Protection of my future. Protection of what I had left. The savings I had spent on this place were more than just money. They were my last line of defense. If I hadn't made that move, if I hadn't put everything into Blackwood Ridge, I knew it would be only a matter of time before they came after more. My grandmother's trust, the only thing I had managed to keep separate from them, was already in their sights. I wasn't just running away. I was locking the door, setting the boundary that should have been set years ago. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me, not again, not anymore. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the ground first vibrated beneath my feet. A heavy diesel engine roared to life in the distance, getting closer, and I didn't have to look out the window to know who it was. I picked up my iPad, tapping the security app without hesitation. The screen lit up, showing a black, heavy-duty pickup truck crawling up my driveway. It wasn't my father's usual sedan. It wasn't Caleb's car. No, this was a rental, a third-party vehicle, the kind of thing you use when you don't want to leave a trace. They had come to take what they thought was theirs. The truck came to a stop right at the front porch, and I could see them getting out. First, my father, tall with his business owner coat, the one he wore when he wanted to intimidate a subcontractor. Then, Caleb, swaggering out of the truck with that proprietary smirk of his as if he owned the place already. And finally, a third man, slick-haired, cheap suit and holding a clipboard, a realtor. The sight of them standing there, so sure of themselves, so entitled to my property, made my blood run cold. They weren't here to talk. They were here to list the property, to claim it as if it had always been theirs. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just watched from the shadows of the hallway, my hand steady on my phone. I could hear their voices through the cameras, Caleb laughing, my father barking orders. I stayed silent. I knew this was coming. The moment when they would show up, expecting everything to bend to their will, expecting me to be the one who fixes things. But this time, I wasn't going to fix anything. I wasn't going to make them comfortable. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me again. I stayed in the shadows, watching as my father took out the spare key to my old apartment in Portland, the one I had never even thought to take back. He slid it into the lock with a false sense of confidence, and when it didn't turn, I could almost hear his irritation. He tried again, then again. And that's when I knew. This was about more than just the door. This was about control. He wasn't trying to open a door. He was trying to force his way into my life, once again into my space, my sanctuary. I stayed in the kitchen, watching them fumble at the door, the crowbar now in my father's hand. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just recorded the entire thing. And I knew that when the moment was right, I would act. This time, they wouldn't win. The lights outside exploded into blinding white, cutting through the night like daylight. I watched as my father shielded his eyes, the sudden brightness throwing him off balance. But it wasn't just the floodlights. It was a sound of sirens that followed their blue and red flashing lights, cutting through the snow. The sheriff's cruiser roared up the driveway, blocking their rental truck, and I could feel the tension in the air snap. Sheriff Miller stepped out. First, his breath puffing into the cold, and behind him, Jasmine, my best friend, my lawyer, and the one person who knew everything. She stood tall, holding a thick binder like a shield, her eyes scanning the scene with cold precision. My father's demeanor changed in an instant. The confident mask he had worn all these years cracked, replaced by something far less certain. He straightened his coat, pulling his business owner's smile back into place, trying to salvage whatever dignity he could. He greeted Sheriff Miller like he was the host of a social gathering, spinning a quick story about a wellness check, about how I was unstable, how he was just trying to protect family property, but the sheriff wasn't buying it. "That's not a wellness check," Miller said, his voice steady flat. "That's a felony." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the truth started to unravel in front of them. Jasmine stepped forward, flipping open the binder. The metal ring snapped loud in the cold air, and I saw her finger tap down on a specific clause. "Clause 404, she said, her voice strong. "Any trustee who commits a felony against trust property is immediately removed and forfeits all inheritance." The words were like a hammer coming down, and I could see my father's face twitch. The crowbar in his hand, the broken door, the entire violation of my space, it all suddenly mattered. I stood in the kitchen, my hand still on my phone, recording everything. And I knew this moment was finally it. The reckoning, the moment of justice. The sheriff began listing the charges: burglary, destruction of property, attempted grand larceny. My father's face twisted with frustration, but there was no escaping it now. The law had spoken. I had spoken. Jasmine gave him no room to maneuver, no room for excuses. "You're under arrest," Miller said, his voice a finality. I couldn't help but watch as my father was cuffed, the sound of the metal clicking against his wrist, more satisfying than I had ever imagined. As the cruiser pulled away, taking him and Caleb with it, I stood there in the silence, and for the first time, I felt free. I was no longer their fixer, their scapegoat. I was no longer the invisible one. I had taken control of my life, my future, and this land. The ranch was mine, and I had reclaimed everything I had almost lost. This was my victory, my closure. The snow had started to fall again gently, like it was trying to make everything new. The ground was covered in a fresh layer, pristine and untouched. It felt like the world had slowed down, like everything that had happened before was finally settling into place. I stood on the porch, watching the flakes drift by, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The storm had passed. The silence around me wasn't empty, it wasn't lonely. It was a kind of silence that only comes when you've fought for something and finally won. I had faced my past, my family, and the traps they set for me. I had taken back control not just of the ranch, but of my life. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. The ranch wasn't just land or property, it was freedom. It was a future that no one could take from me. As the cold air filled my lungs, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. There was still a long way to go, but I had taken the first step. I had done what I needed to do to secure my future, and that was enough. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need anyone's permission. I had what I needed, and it was all in my hands. If you've enjoyed this story and feel like it resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm not one for big speeches, but it really does mean a lot. This journey, my journey, isn't just about me. It's about all of us finding our own way, carving our own path, and never letting anyone take that from us. Take care and keep moving forward.